in the podcast. It is podcast 6 that you're on, Mom.
Okay.
If you need to know for future reference.
Okay.
So today my guest is my mom. I'm having my parents on as some of my first guests, not just because they're my parents though, it's also because they're two of the most knowledgeable people that I know.
And we're handy.
And we're handy. Yeah, my parents live right down the road. So today I have with me my mom, Linda Swindler, and we're going to be talking about canning. So on my social media for the last 10 years, of all of the topics that I've talked about, do you want to know what I've had the most questions about?
Evidently canning.
It's canning. People are really interested in preserving their own food. Why do you have an alarm?
To take those supplements you
This is real life, people. At least she's being compliant with her supplement regime. Okay. So I think this is really a pertinent topic, particularly this year, because with COVID, so many people have grown a garden this year that have never grown a garden. And then, of course, the next question is, oh my gosh, I actually grew a garden. I don't know what to do with all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we do our food preservation in a way that is safe and also efficient? And I think that canning is probably the most intimidating style of preservation.
Probably, I would say the other options are freezing,
Mm-hmm.
which has a lot less regulations, but then you have to have a lot of freezer space.
Yep.
And you have to remember to take things out of the freezer so they're thawed
Yeah,
before
not
you can
very good
use
at
them.
that. Yeah.
And or dehydrating.
Yeah.
Which is just a little more time consuming, but so canning I think has a lot more things to it.
Yeah, for sure. So my mom has been canning. You didn't just start canning when you became a farm wife. You canned with Moo growing up.
She didn't do that much canning until they moved to their other
Okay.
property out of town
Okay.
and had a big garden. She did jellies and things, but
So how did you get into it then?
when we grew a garden, when we were married, we grew a good big garden, and like you say, you have to know how to do it.
Yeah.
And fortunate to live in a place where there's good resources.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about some of those resources. Says, it takes a lot of knowledge to be able to do canning. And I think there's also, at least I have seen a lot of incorrect information out there, whether it's in old cookbooks or it's even online. People are posting things that aren't the best resources. So
I even got caught in that myself this year, and I can go into that.
So we're going to tell
I
some
can
of
go
our
into
bloopers.
that, yeah.
I'm going to tell some of my bloopers too. So I think the most important thing you can possibly have if you're going to talk about doing canning before you go and get anything else that you need is this book. So for those of you on the podcast, this is the Blue Book of Preserving by the Ball Canning Company. And you can see mine is like do you have yours with you?
Well, I don't have
Mine is very used
this
and
was I
abused.
got as a Better Homes and Garden. It was a wedding gift. So that shows you how long I've had it. Also should be an indication that some of the information might be out of date.
Yes.
I would say if you have access, and you should somewhere in your county have access to your extension office.
Mm-hmm.
They come out with things that are called bulletins. If you see this.
Yep. This one says canning and freezing tomatoes. So that's just like a little folder that has the most recent science-based information, right?
Right, with recipes that are approved.
Mm-hmm.
Here's one, low acid vegetables.
Very important.
Pickling products.
Pickling is the most
jams, jellies, and spreads. Fruit products. Here's a whole one on just salsa.
People love salsa, and I think it's the most labor-intensive
Let's preserve sauerkraut.
Ooh, yep.
There's differing opinions on that.
Yep, there are.
And then freezing vegetables.
Yes.
That's just an example, and these aren't really the most current ones. I'm sure that because I haven't had to
look for a long time.
Look, yeah. But that's what I would really say. If you have any questions at all, get to your extension agents. They're a branch of your ag-based land grant university in your state. It's kind of how that works.
Yeah.
And all this is based on the research and things that they have done at the university, and then they put it out. And they would also have, if you have questions, they would have a resource person. We used to get to have like a home economist in each county. We don't have that anymore, but there is a county agent who could also answer a lot of your questions or get you to a person that could help you out.
So if you're trying to figure out who that is, in our state, this is North Dakota, it's NDSU, North Dakota State University. That's kind of the hub for the extensions. And then ours is based out of our county at the courthouse. So maybe even just going to your courthouse and asking.
Yes.
And we're not going to have time to tell you how to can today. Okay. Like it's not possible.
Well, can I just say something more about?
Yes, you can.
And I don't know if this is even in effect anymore, but they used to offer classes in home canning, and then you could be certified as a home canning expert, so that if there was home canning questions, they would be referred to this local person.
Okay.
And so there might be that resource for you too.
I wonder if they're doing that, because they are doing the master gardener thing still. So
right.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I know a lot about extension has changed, but as far as resources to teach you how to can, we actually have one here in-house with me. So in the fall session of the Intuitive and Seasonal Living Academy, which you can find by going to bit.ly/my capital ISLA, my ISLA, you can get enrolled in the Intuitive and Seasonal Living Academy. You can either do the whole year or you can do one session. Now, next week on Tuesday, actually, is our fall equinox. Did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
So that means we're like fully into fall things. And of course, at this time of year, fall, the purpose of fall from traditional Chinese medicine is to harvest. Part of harvesting is knowing what to do with that stuff. And I have a bonus session in the Fall Academy about canning that goes through a lot of the things that you're going to need in terms of, okay, you need these kind of jars, you need these kind of lids, you need this kind of canning vessel, you need to not do these things. And so if you're looking for more details about how to can, that is a really great place to start. So again, that's bit.ly/my and then all capital ISLA. So check that out. But today we're going to be talking to you about common canning mistakes, some of which we've made, some of which we have not made. And it's important to know with canning that there's actually some really serious consequences to making some mistakes. Do you want to just talk about some of the consequences of doing things incorrectly?
Botulism.
I'm terrified of botulism. So terrified.
Well, and then you have your high acid foods and your low acid foods. You can water bath can anything that's high acid, but you must pressure can those things that are considered low acid. Fruits and vegetables, certain ones are low acid, and any kind of meats are low acid and have to be pressure canned, because in order to kill the bacteria in those food items, you have to have your water temperature higher than boiling, and the only way you can do that is through a pressure canner. I don't pressure can for a variety of reasons, and I'm just not going to at this point in my life. So not an expert in that, but that's where you start. Can I pressure can, or can I water bath can?
So if you're wondering, like, even if the food that you're working with is a low or high acid food, the Ball Blue Book is divided into two sections. One is the high acid, one is the low acid, and you'll have different directions for how to can depending on what that particular food is. I do pressure can, but I do it very infrequently, simply because I feel like it's a lot of resources and energy that have to go in to can that food. And then I'm also suspicious about what happens to the nutrient density and the nutrient content when you have to just cook something for so long. But there is definitely a time and a place for it. And so it's something that I've played with a little bit, and I'm now hearing that people are doing it in their Instapots.
No, that's a no-no.
That's a no-no?
That is a no-no, and it'll tell you in your instructions you get with your Instapot or the different brands. Yes.
Oh, okay.
They're not approved for that. Maybe that's coming down the pipe, but it's a no-no.
So let's talk about what you mean when you're saying approved, because I think that people may not realize that a lot of the canning recipes out there all of them that we're going to use need to actually have been tested in a lab to make sure that the ingredients and the temperatures and all of that.
Like your ratios need to be kept proper. You need to follow that recipe so that if you're water bath canning, that you have not altered the acidity. Let's take spaghetti sauce, for instance. You start with tomatoes, which are a high acid, normally not a problem. And then, but you want to dump in onions and green peppers and that sort of thing. you just can't randomly do that. You have to keep it at a ratio that keeps that acidity up. So you need to follow those recipes. Like if you double it, fine, but you've got to keep that high acid product at the same ratio.
Yeah, so in other words, if you're adding extra ingredients that aren't in the recipe, you could be changing the pH, which could change the type of safety protocol that you need to follow in order to not get botulism. And let's just not have botulism ever. No. I do have a botulism story for the end of this podcast, so make sure you listen to the end. Okay, so let's go through some of our canning mistakes. So that was number one that we didn't even think we were going to talk about. Number one is, I guess right now you're not allowed to can in your Instapot.
Right.
Somebody knows differently. If there's been some testing done in the lab.
That was the instructions in my instructions.
Okay, I don't know if I even see. I'm not a rule follower.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if I read my instructions.
Should you be canning?
Not in that. The only thing I really follow instructions in the kitchen to a T is when I am canning, and it is because of these safety things. So
pay attention.
Yes. So number two is paying attention. So I'm going to put you on the spot because you have a good story about this. You were making the spaghetti sauce that one time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And it was in the fall. Lots of things were happening. I had one child that was playing basketball. I needed to go to her game. The guys were in the field. I thought I would get my sauce all boiled down, and then when I came home, I would can it. So I was hurrying around, rushing around, had it bubbling so nice. And I have a separate stove that I'm fortunate enough to have a separate area where I can do my canning. And this, it's a kind of what we call a retro stove, and the controls are tricky. And in my haste to turn the burner off and flee the house, I turned it to high and went 30 miles from home. Fortunately, my son and my husband happened to pop into the house to check on something from when they came in from the field, and there was this horrible thing happening in
like
there.
Smoke was pouring out of it.
And terrible smell, and my son was able to grab a hold of this stock pot that was almost red hot and get it out onto the concrete. But in the meantime, I didn't burn down the house, but I had, look, you know how the mud pots in Yellowstone are, how they burst and they kind of bubble. I had spaghetti sauce everywhere in that room, but I was very fortunate. And it was one of these super clad stock pots, and it even separated all those levels.
The layers of metal that are in the bottom.
Yes, and so that was my warning. You only get one of those warnings.
Yeah.
I didn't burn down the house.
Yeah.
Nobody died, but pay attention.
Yeah.
Pay attention to what you're doing.
And it's also tragic, even when you're just like, so this is my little version of that, is that I am doing a million things at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can leave, like, say I'm making applesauce, which is really prone to burn. And I think I can leave it for a while and I'll go do something else and come back and they'll have a nice charred layer of apples that are stuck on the bottom of the pan. And then everything that you're cooking smells like all of the rest of the sauce is kind of
scorched.
Yeah, scorched.
So pay attention.
So don't do that. Pay attention. And it's also, it's a lot of work to put into preparing your food to even get to the point where you're putting it into jars. So you definitely don't want your work to go to waste, especially when you do something like salsa, which is so much chopping.
Audiobooks.
Although you did watch Sharknado while you were making salsa this year, which is very out of character and hard to understand. Okay, next mistake. You're up.
Use only regular canning jars and approved canning lids. Don't use your mayonnaise jars, your peanut butter jars from the store. They are not tempered glass. They're not approved for the high temperatures of everything is hot. When you're canning, everything is hot. They will burst. The lids may not fit on them properly. Save them for something else, dry storage of your rice and beans or something, but not for canning.
Yes, they're awesome for herbs and things like that. So when I was first getting going with canning, I, of course, went from 0 to 5,000 miles an hour with it right away is how I do everything. And so I was needing a lot more canning jars. So there was a lot of older ladies in the town that I lived at the time that were giving away canning jars. And so I would go and I'd pick up like boxes of these canning jars, and invariably about half of them would be old mayonnaise jars, peanut butter jars, whatever. And the lids really don't fit on them. And you can even feel that the thickness almost of the
it's not
glass.
tempered. It needs to be a regular mason jar.
And let me tell you what you don't want to have exploding, and it happens sometimes anyway, is a jar inside your canner.
I know, it's a mess. It's discouraging.
Yes. That's sad. And that'll happen even with your tempered glass.
Every once in a while you get one that's just become weakened for whatever reason, and the bottom will crack out or something.
Yep. Okay. So we've already talked about using tested recipes. Next one that I have kind of dovetailed with what we just said is not having your jars hot when you're ready to put your food material into your jar, right? Yeah.
Everything is hot.
You have to have it hot.
Everything hot.
So what I do is I time the heating of my water bath and the boiling of my food material, whatever that is, to whenever my dishwasher is going to end. And I can see on my dishwasher how much.
So you're saying you're sterilizing your jars in your dishwasher? Not everybody does that.
Yeah, I sterilize my jars in the dishwasher because it's easiest, and it also keeps them really hot. Like my dishwasher, I can barely touch them.
Right.
And then I go.
I can use one tip.
Yes, we'll get to that too. So I go straight from that to putting the food into it, and then for me, I have enough room on my stovetop that I actually put that jar right next to the water bath canner so that it stays warm while I'm getting the other 6 jars filled. What I used to do is sterilize my jars the night before and then be like, it doesn't matter that much that they're not hot. And then almost all of my bottoms would blow off. I did that with like a whole batch of pickles one time. So don't do that. You really need to have your jars hot. So your tip for hot jars.
Rubber gloves.
So she has a pair of rubber gloves here.
I don't know why I didn't know about this, and nobody has ever said it's something I figured out on my own by accident. But like taking out those hot jars from your dishwasher or however you sanitize them or whatever, it's just so much easier than using hot mitts or a pot holder or whatever, a towel. They're just clumsy. And I find even when I'm filling the jars and you kind of have to steady it, and whatever, and you can't grab onto these hot things for very long, but it gives me good grip when everything's, moist and wet. I'll use your favorite word.
I know.
And so not the kinds the doctor wears or whatever, but just your
regular
household,
old yellow ones you get at the grocery store with all the other kitchen gadgets.
That has been a game changer for me anyway.
I always forget those because for years I didn't have them around because my cat was obsessed with them.
Oh, that's right.
Okay, so next one that I have is not adjusting your processing time for your altitude.
We're not real high here.
But we're high enough you have to adjust
I
it.
know.
So here we are, we're at like, somewhere between 25 and 32.
Let's just say 25.
100 feet above sea level. And that is actually enough elevation here in North Dakota where you do need to adjust, meaning that the higher in elevation you go, the more processing time you need.
Right. So if your processing time is under 20 minutes, you add a minute for every 1,000 feet. If it's your processing time is over 20 minutes, you add 2 minutes for every 1,000 feet.
Yeah. So I have a salsa recipe that I got from Grit Magazine. I've been using it for years, and I know that it was tested because they're that kind of a resource. But they didn't have an altitude adjustment in there, so I had to manually calculate that. And if you forget what she says, there is instructions for adjusting that in the Ball Blue Book as well.
Yes.
What do you have next?
Let's see. Headspace. No, this isn't a real good example.
No, this is an example of way too much headspace.
Yeah. Headspace is the amount from where your food ends and your lid, the top of your lid stops. You need to have whatever is in your recipe. Generally, it's a 1/2 inch, which just conveniently is like where this little ridge is. Common mistake I would always make is putting pickles in the jar. Oh, you just want to get that last one in. Oh, it's just it's just coming up a little bit into that space. It'll be fine. Two things happen. Your brine doesn't come up far enough, and then your lid can't suck down into that space. That's what the reason for that head space is that that lid, as it cools, it's everything's hot and everything cools, it forms this suction and this airtight seal. So you need to have that, be sure that you leave that headspace.
Yeah.
Don't try and, cheat.
Yeah, even
and
if you have a
fudge.
little bit left in the pan and you're like, oh, I don't want this hard work to go to waste, don't overfill it, because then
Yeah.
it won't seal and then you'll be angry.
Yep.
Okay. What else do you have?
Some recipes, I haven't seen them lately, but when I first started this, they would talk about oven processing. You could fill your jars, have your oven preheated at a certain temperature, stick your things in there, turn your oven off, and in so many minutes you could take things out. And that is not approved. It's not safe. The temperature is very variable throughout that space. So I actually have a recipe I really like that called for oven processing. Well, I still use the recipe, but I process it in the water bath.
Which recipe is that?
That's Grandma's Pickles.
Oh, so good. Yes. Okay, I have a good one. Not reusing lids, but this one has a caveat to it. So these types of lids, so the one that I'm showing right now are the lids that you typically buy at the grocery store. This happens to be a Ball brand. And it's like metal on the top and it must be plastic on the bottom. And then it has,
this is not plastic.
Whatever this is, metal. And then it's got like a red or orangish ring around it that seals to the mouth of the jar. These are only supposed to be used one time and then thrown away, because over time, this seal can degrade and you might not get a full seal, which then would allow bacteria and things like that in, right?
Plus, when you are opening a jar of something, what do you tend to do? You get the can open, you go, and so then you've altered the shape of this and it's not going to set down on the top of your lid.
Yes, so as tempting as it is, especially this year with the canning lid shortage, botulism, that's the only word I want to say to you. That should be your only motivation. Now, I do have a caveat to this. There are reusable canning lids that you can get, and I've been using the Tatler canning lid brand for years. So it's a safe plastic. It's one of the more healthy plastics, if there is such a thing. And then it has these rings that come with it as well.
Rubber rings.
Yep. There are other ones. So I have some from Europe that are glass lids with rubber sealer things like this too, that can be reused. But these you can use over and over and over. In fact, I have, I've had these for 6 or 7 years and I've never had a problem with them. You use them exactly the same as your other lids in terms of you have to sanitize them before you use them.
They have to be hot.
They have to be really hot.
You have to check that ring so that it
has to be seated down into the lid, of course. And it's a little bit different process for what you do with your ring after you do it. But the point is that you can reuse this over and over and over again. So buy it once and you're done. So this year, you're not like, if you had these, you wouldn't be chasing around lids like so many of us have had to do. Mom's actually had to steal these from me. So I'm going to put a link for these in the show notes because I think they're a tremendous investment. If canning is something that you want to do long term, you can get the wide mouth and you can get the narrow mouth of these and they last for forever. So those are the only lids that you can really reuse.
Okay.
Do you have anything else on your?
Oh, just getting back to pickles.
Oh yes, pickles.
You have to make sure all your vegetables or products that you're putting in the jar are clean. So as you're scrubbing your cucumbers, which is another really tedious thing, but really, really important, I learned that you need to take a paring knife and trim off just a little sliver of the blossom end of the cucumber because that is the area where bacteria wants to harbor. So if you just slice it off, there's a better chance that you have a good product when you're done.
Yeah, I just take off the tiny bit of the end of both ends of my cucumbers just to be on the safe side, and then I scrub them with a potato sort of scrubber just to make sure there's On some varieties of cucumbers, there's kind of those prickly, sticky
Yeah, the
things.
pickler varieties.
And that's another place where bacteria like to hang out. So we're avoiding bacteria is what we're doing with safe canning procedures.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, last one. And this is really hard. Once you've done all of this work and your jars have sealed and you've had them in your pantry or whatever, every once in a while you're going to come across a questionable jar, and it might be for various reasons. If there's stuff oozing from it,
Or discolored.
something doesn't look right. Like, here's a good example. This is very tragic, actually. So these are some beautiful peaches from Oregon that our friend Wanda brought us a couple of summers ago, and this is my last jar. And this morning when I opened up my pantry to get my salsa that I did yesterday in there, I noticed that there's been all of this evaporation that's happened with the peaches, even though it's still sealed. This, to me, for me, I don't know if you would eat it, but to me, this is alarming. Like, the liquid used to be up this high, now it's this high. So how did it get like that? How is it evaporating when it's supposed to be perfectly sealed?
If you took it out of the canner and it was this much, it means that this much down from when you put it, it means that you had air bubbles in there. But if when you were done and you stored it, it was up to here and now it isn't. I would say that's questionable. When in doubt, and here, and I'm not explaining this for those on the podcast, where you should have some space between your headspace and the top of your lid, usually about a ½ inch. This liquid is down into the jar a couple of inches. There's extra air, a couple of inches in the jar. I am going to throw these away, and I'm not even going to give them to the chickens, and I'm going to tell you a story about why in a second. But I've had some other things like that. Have you had some things like that? Yes, and it is. It's really hard to throw them away. I was just reviewing some of the information on home canning, and it says that if you are, kind of questioning something, you can heat it up to boiling. And then not only would that perhaps kill something that's bad in it, but that's when off smells on what might come through. I really don't think I'd want to eat peaches after they've been boiled.
Yeah, and again,
so I would just throw it away.
And then you're getting back to again, cooking your food at a high temperature.
Yeah.
Is there going to be any nutrient left in
Right.
that by the time you're done with it? But also, I've seen that botulism can take a long time at a boil in order to kill. And so, I mean, is it really worth the risk? It truly isn't. So some other things that I've had weird oozing from a jar. I've had a couple of jars that were sealed perfectly. Everything looked fine, perfect headspace. But when I opened it, there was a strange smell. It was like almost like a metallic, bitter smell. And I don't know what that was, but I know it wasn't risking my life over botulism to find out if it was okay or not. So our friend Wanda told me, do you know Wanda's story about botulism and canning? So this is when she was growing up. She grew up on a farm, our friend Wanda. And there was a questionable canned item. I don't remember what it was exactly. And it was decided by someone that, well, the humans probably shouldn't eat that, but we'll just throw it to the chickens. So somebody went out and tossed this jar of questionable stuff to the chickens, and they went out like a ½ hour later and all the chickens were dead.
Oh. No, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not a good thing.
It's not a good thing. It is not worth taking a risk for your life over.
I did see something where, like, when you dispose of it, make sure that no humans or animals can get into it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and in fact, I found a jar. Have you ever had this happen? I found a jar in my pantry this last week that had been sealed previously, and all of a sudden it had unsealed itself.
Yeah, if anytime it's well, that just means that it's something in there is fermenting or whatever, giving off gases, and it has broken that seal. So
so there's good fermentation, but then this is an example of the bad kind of fermentation that we don't want.
Fermentation at all.
I do. Not a rule follower, but I do follow rules if there's botulism at stake. So anything else that you can think of?
Well, I mentioned that I got caught in a mistake. I just realized it now. I haven't made jelly for a long time, but I decided to make apple jelly this year because I finally have an apple tree that's producing enough that I can
Yay,
actually
this
make.
is a huge victory in North Dakota.
This is 44 years.
Very, very
trying.
hard to be an apple tree in North
Yes.
Dakota.
So anyway, I made some lovely apple jelly, and because of the lid shortage,
Mhm.
I decided to follow. I looked in my Better Homes and Gardens, and it says that jellies do not have to be processed because of their high sugar content, and that you can, anyways, you can use the paraffin wax. Oh, I happen to have paraffin wax. So I sealed all of those with, all those jars of jelly with paraffin wax. And now I read in my North Dakota Extension Bulletin that jellies need to be processed. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them. I'll figure something out.
Yeah.
Whether I stick them in the freezer or something, I think they'll
Yeah.
be fine.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I used outdated information.
And that's easy to do. Like if you are a book lover like me and my husband, and you like to go to like garage sales or used books stores, and you find like these really cool old books about how to do things like modern homesteading and whatever, they're going to have some instructions in there, and those instructions very likely are not going to be based on the most recent information that we have. So be careful of that as well. But for the most part, you know, I think like the risks of canning, once you kind of get the hang of what canning's about,
if you have a chance to have a mentor,
Yeah.
you know, or now I suppose YouTube, you can just watch on YouTube. But again, watch and make sure that that is a trusted source, that they are following the rules. But you know, just the procedure sometimes looks a little bit daunting. Like, what do you do first? And some of that just ends up to be trial and error. Like, oh, I didn't start my water soon enough, and now I'm ready, and it's not boiling.
Yep.
And you know, so that's time consuming. But
I'm actually going to be writing a blog this week about how to make your canning process more efficient. Some tools that I've used, and then also just timing of things that they don't tell you in the recipes that can really help to make the process much faster. I mean, I can make a batch of pickles now in half the time that it used to take me, because I finally figured out the timing of things and how fast I can work as well. But tell us some of the things that you can, and then some of the benefits that you enjoyed from canning.
Well, this year I did peaches. They really taste good in the winter time, and my grandsons all love them, so it's kind of a treat for them. I used to do pears. I didn't do any pears this year. You know, it's just what I have time for. Pickles, we always have to have dill pickles, lots of salsa, lots of the tomato-y things. Did the applesauce, the jelly, salsa, spaghetti sauce. We make a vegetable juice called V4 juice, not V8, because there's only 4 vegetables in order to keep the ratio so that it's
the pH safe.
The pH is safe. Yeah, those are
That's
some.
probably most of it.
Most of it, yeah.
I do most of those things as well. Slightly different recipes sometimes, but we've been using a lot of the same recipes for a long time. So once you find something that you like and that works for you, that's another tip, is like, don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, if you find a really great pickle recipe, just go with that.
And again, I only water bath can, so that limits what I do, you know, can. A lot of people do corn and beans and peas and whatever.
I talked to somebody the other day that does potatoes.
Oh, yeah.
They peel their potatoes and then they pressure can them in water, and then they use them for like potato salads.
Oh.
Which I thought was interesting. So that's another way to preserve your food when you know your potatoes aren't going to last all winter. So just a matter of like where you want to start. So if somebody wants to start canning, what do you think their first canning project should be? Should it be pickles, or should it be?
Well, definitely start with something you know you like. Like I would never can peas, because canned peas sound horrible to me. So I would never spend that much time and effort. No. So if you know, pickles, I think
pickles are a good one.
Are pretty forgiving. And then the tomato products. There again, if you have, you might need additional things to help, like that puree and whatever. We have a gadget we call the Squeezo. It's kind of transformed doing that sort of thing in applesauce. And if not, you can freeze whole, I mean, you can can whole tomatoes without, but yeah, pickles. I don't know. I guess because that's where I started.
Yeah, if I've ever kind of help somebody get into canning, it's been starting with pickles, but I think actually I've brought a lot of those people to you too. So I learned the right way. But now, like after all these years of doing it, it's been a long time that I've been canning myself on my own. So I feel comfortable kind of guiding that process. And in the fall session of the Intuitive and Seasonal Living Academy, that bonus session, I do talk about some of those extra tools that are really helpful. It's like for the tomato products and things like that. So if that's of interest to you, again, you can go to bit.ly/my and get yourself enrolled in fall session. We start next Tuesday or anytime after that that works for you in your life. Thanks, Mom. Is there anything else you want to say about canning?
You do the work now and enjoy the fruits of your labor in the middle of winter.
Yes, that's one of the best things.
Yeah.
It's like, I love, it's so iconic this time of year to come in Mom's house and to smell pickles or tomatoes that are ready to be canned. And we're doing harvest and there's like so much activity this time of year. It's like,
sometimes hard to fit it in.
it's almost like you question, is it worth all these extra hours of work at this time of year that's so full and so stressful to do this? But then you get into the dead of winter and you can make your tomato soups or your stews or have that jar of peaches that reminds you that summer will come again. That's very meaningful and it's very nourishing, and it's a way to cut down on, you know, your food budget as well.
Yep.
So there's lots of benefits to it, but these are some of the mistakes that we have made and that we don't want you to make, as well as some additional ones that are really important to remember for safety. Again, checking out the latest resources from your extension facility are going to be really helpful as well. If this was interesting to you, please like, comment, subscribe, and make sure you hit that button for notifications so that you know when the next vlog or podcast is up. And we will see you next.